Hello, welcome to Basin Safety Consulting and Training. Today we're going to be covering HAZCOM, GHS, Benzene, NORM, and TeNorm from an awareness level, and I promise you it's not going to be as painful as it sounds. We've taken and combined a bunch of different topics that are relative to each other, and rather than doing 3 or 4 different training, we're combining them into one to make it simple and easy to digest, and I promise you it is not going to be as painful as it sounds. So we have about 5 objectives here for the first session of this course. We're going to be talking about HAZCOM first. We're going to learn what it is, how to protect yourself from hazardous chemicals, know how to use something called the ERG guide or emergency response guide, also knowing how to use the SDS, also known as the safety data sheet, and understanding your right to know about the chemicals you work with in your workplace. Makes sense, but still needs to be trained on. All right, this is not a dangerous goods course. That is a completely separate course that we also offer. Deals with shipping, packing types, a lot more detailed information in the DOT realm. This is a hazardous communication course. Essentially, the way that we communicate about the chemicals that we work with to our workers in the workplace. So hazardous substances obviously exist. We use them for solvents, cleaners, and different types of industrial processes. They're around. We use them. But they can make you sick. They can cause cancer, physically harm you in different ways. And so HAZCOM is a part of a much bigger program known as the Globally Harmonized System. So HAZCOM's been around for a long time. GHS has only been around for about 8 years now. GHS is essentially the international way that we communicate hazards about chemicals. We do that in a very clear pictographic way rather than just writing it out because, let's be honest, not everyone speaks English. They may someday, but for right now they don't. So we use these symbols, and we'll go through them more later, to essentially showcase what hazards exist with that chemical from a distance, right? You can walk up to a chemical, see an explosive label on it or an explosive icon, and be like, hey, that's explosive. I should probably not be smoking over here, and go ahead and turn around and take your cigarette outside. HAZCOM is known as the right to know law, and the reason for that is it's really about communicating to your people what is in a chemical, how that would affect you, how to, essentially if it catches fire, put it out, if it spills, how to clean it up. These are things that are important to know if you're working around dangerous chemicals. If you're a YouTube guy, and I'm a YouTube guy, you get sucked in sometimes, and you'll see videos about, disasters, chemical disasters. OSHA, there's this great Instagram page, OSHA Is This Safe? Highly recommend. You just see people doing stuff, and you're like, oh my God, why would they do that? Now, some people choose to do the wrong thing, but we want to make sure that people have the right information. So if they want to do the right thing and keep themselves safe, they have that information. So you have the right to know. This is combined with the global system, even though OSHA is a more federal, localized United States program. And essentially, we're bringing the world together when it comes to chemical safety because you should know what you're working with and, again, how it affects you and the physical environment around you. So this is, we're going to be talking about labels. HAZCOM has, 4 or 5 different pillars, if you will. Essentially, the labeling is a big part of that. We're going to talk about that. The SDSs, the training that's required of you, keeping an adequate chemical inventory, and then also having a written program, a health and safety manual program for dealing with chemicals that you have. So with all of these, again, they kind of combine and are a part of HAZCOM. So the written program kind of comes first because, even though I said it last in the previous slide, because if you don't have a program, how do you, hold yourself accountable to a system for protecting employees? This is going to deal with how we, take in new chemicals, where we put the SDS book, where we store chemicals, how we store chemicals, how much of a chemical we're going to store. All that's going to be in the HAZCOM program. It's not necessarily in this program going to give you specific details about every chemical that you have. That's more the SDS book, but it is going to give you an overall picture of how we deal with chemicals, how we train our people on the chemicals we have. If we no longer are using a chemical, how do we remove that from the inventory and communicate that effectively, etc. All right, so chemical inventory, it is what it sounds like. I don't want to overcomplicate this. You get a chemical in, you put it on a list. Hey, we have this chemical in the shop. That list should be up to date. It should be thorough. And then, probably not a bad idea if you have those lists. Maybe find a way to highlight the real dangerous stuff. Not required. I'm just kind of throwing this out there. But, highlighted in the book where this one's yellow or red or orange or 5 different colors to communicate that it is a dangerous chemical. So, and this goes for all chemicals. And yes, it sounds ridiculous, but officially, even for like things like hand soap, toilet bowl cleaner, Windex, things like this that you think, why do we need that here? Well, if you have any toddlers around that have drank Windex thinking it's Gatorade because you could have put it in a Gatorade bottle, not that I've ever done that, but if you ever find yourself in that situation, you know why this is a good idea. Don't worry, no, I don't have any kids, and that's never happened to me, but it has happened in the world. It's a very real and kind of sad instance, but it has happened in the past. So, labels. Obviously, for a toddler, labels aren't going to mean a whole lot, but for those of us that are, literate, they're important. And even if you're not, they even have images, pictograms that show us the hazards of those chemicals. So, the labeling requirements used to be a little bit loose, right? It's like, well, if it's bad, say it's bad. Well, what specifically do you have to say on the label? Do you have to say that it's explosive? Do you have to say that it's toxic? Do you have to say that it's corrosive? And so people kind of interpreted their own, way with these labels. So the GHS program kind of gave a very specific guideline for what needs to be on a label, how much should be on that label, especially involving toxic chemicals. Now, you're not typically going to see this on, again, hand soap. But with a chemical such as acrolein, I like to use this as an example, that literally if like a gallon of this stuff gets spilled, and it's like within a mile of a town, the entire town should be evacuated. Probably not a bad idea to put a label on it, right? Like, hey, you spill this, get the whole town that you're near, get everybody out of here. It's that bad. Labeling is a great idea, especially, again, for more dangerous chemicals. I want to put this in correct context, right? But also secondary containers. And what that means is if I take a chemical from a drum and put it into a spray bottle or into a smaller 1-gallon bottle or something, because it's more usable that way, I have to label that secondary container the same way I labeled the original container, right? So if it's, again, a chemical like acrolein, you can't say, oh, I took it out of the drum and put it in this spray bottle, now it's not as dangerous, and people don't have a right to know that it's dangerous. You see how I did that? I kind of weave that in there. Okay, moving on. Like I said, we're going to make this painless. All right, pictograms. So a couple quick things about the pictograms. Pretty straightforward. You look at them, you're like, all right, I see the fish dead on the dangerous to the environment. Pretty much that's, obviously dangerous to the environment, right? The compressed gas cylinder, pretty straightforward. Flammable, you're going to look at that. Yeah, that's fire. That's a problem. It's probably a fire issue. A couple of these that people get wrong. They forget the oxidizing one. Oxidizing essentially means when it mixes with air, it reacts in some way, and it can be fire. It can become toxic. It can become corrosive. There's a lot of different things, but the O with the fire on top of it, just remember oxidizing. In a similar fashion, another one that people get mixed up or don't know is the exclamation point. So what I like to do is think of that exclamation point as an upside down I for irritant, right? So we have irritant, all right, harmful irritant. The last one that people get confused is the health hazard. A lot of people say, and they get it mostly right. They look at it and they say, oh, there's something wrong with the guy's lungs. It's probably an inhalation hazard, or don't breathe this in, which is usually the case. True, aspiration is the most common route for a health hazard. You breathe something and you shouldn't. But overall, you see a person, it means anything related to health. So it could be, bone cancer, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, leukemia. But these are the 9 different pictograms that we use for GHS. So you see these on something, hey, that is probably not something I want to be, bathing in. OSHA, again, that's been around for a long time. They have a bunch of good quick cards. And I know if you're like me, you're up late Saturday night, you're like, what, man, I'm feeling pretty crazy. I'm going to look at some OSHA quick cards. I get it. You probably don't have any friends just like me. But no, if you do want to have access to this information, it's available on OSHA's website. You search OSHA quick cards, GHS, there's a bunch of good information on there. It gives direction on how to do this appropriately. So if your company's like, man, we're all about it. We want our people to know what's the process. These make it very simple and easy to do so. All right, some other labels I have out there. I'm going to go through these. This is the diamond is called the NFPA 704 label. NFPA and OSHA are very different. NFPA is kind of what we call like an industry best practices group or a para-industry group. It's not necessarily a federal group, but they do work closely with them. So OSHA, if they don't have specific requirements, they're going to reference the NFPA. Most fire stuff is that way, actually. If you, for example, do service on a fire extinguisher, you need NFPA training. It's a whole thing. I'm not going to get into it. Again, going to make this painless. So the numbering system here is from 0 to 4. 4 being the highest hazard. And I'm not going to go super in depth here, but 4 means deadly on the health side. We're focusing on health today. 3 is extreme danger. 2 is hazardous. 1 is slightly hazardous, and then 0 is normal material or nothing. And usually we just leave that one blank. So that's how you use this. These are also affixed on buildings with chemicals to tell firefighters, for example, emergency responders. They can see this usually about 15 inches, like a big pictogram, with the most dangerous chemical inside. So as they're coming up it and they see a 4 and on the fire hazard and a 4 on the health hazard, they're probably not going to go in there guns blazing before they know what they're coming up against. Because some things you spray water on it, and again, oxidization, there's oxygen in water, you're going to have a big explosion. So it's important to know what you're coming up against. And again, just another reason to label things. Again, there's another OSHA quick card on this. If you're curious, Saturday night, man, just feeling crazy, you just got to get something out of your system, then you can look this up and have a really, really fun Saturday night. All right, there's another label out there for mostly regarding PPE. I like it. It's the Hemis Standard, which is Canadian. No, you wouldn't typically say Hemis. It is not very easy to remember, but it's helpful. Essentially uses a lettering system for the level of PPE that you need. A being the least amount of PPE, typically just some safety glasses or goggles, all the way up to K, which is full-blown suit, breathing apparatus, apron, gloves, safety helmet, everything. So you see a K on a chemical, in Canada with the NFPA 704 kind of combined, and you're going to be like, okay, I'm not messing with that chemical unless I have the right stuff on. Same thing with cleaning up spills. If there's a spill and you don't know what the chemical is, don't just start spraying water on it or putting some kitty litter down. Like, you should know how it reacts with different things before you clean it up. So make sure you're trained before you clean it up. That's in the HAZWOPER world, Hazardous Waste Emergency Responder, Operations and Emergency Response. Fantastic class. Again, that's for a different day. So the alternative labels are essentially used as an additional label to just kind of help quickly identify, what kind of PPE do we need? Is this flammable? Is it corrosive? Can we not mix it with water, etc.? Just a quick way to determine the hazard of a chemical. All right, one other labeling system we use is the UNID number. Now this is again, we have a course for this. So yes, again, being the safety guy, lots of friends, especially you start bringing this up at parties, like, yeah, man, let me tell you about the UNID numbers for these chemicals here. Not very popular topic in case you're wondering and trying to make friends. Anyway, the UNID numbers are associated in the Emergency Response Guidebook. You can look up a chemical by the number, and it's going to give you some very specific information. It's going to direct you to the name of that chemical, and then it's going to tell you how to clean it up, how far you need to evacuate people if it's released into the atmosphere, onto the ground, etc. We have a video on this. I'm going to skip that really quick. Hopefully See, oh, hopefully that didn't mess me up too bad. The Erg Guidebook, as I mentioned, there's actually a new version of this, 2020, but we're not going to go through it so too in depth. So for our purposes, the 2016 one will be fine. It has 4 different color-coded sections, and those different sections correspond to the danger of the chemical. So the yellows, the yellow color, you can look up the name, or excuse me, by the number you can find the name. Then you're going to take that name and then look it up in the blue category, and then go to the orange to determine what you should do to respond to it as an emergency response person or as a concerned bystander. And again, for you, very busy weekend warrior types, Saturday night, you can download the app and look through all the different elements of this. It's actually pretty cool. Yeah, cool. I know it's probably not the right word to use, but it's cool. You can type in a chemical number, a chemical name, and then see everything about it. For example, acrolein, if you were to look up that chemical, and I recommend it, because no one has anything to do with their free time, you're going to see, yeah, man, if this chemical is released accidentally, we need to evacuate the city. Like, everybody's gone. Same things with things like ammonia, anhydrous ammonia, which is pretty common up here in the rural part of North Dakota. There was actually a huge anhydrous ammonia spill in Minot a few years back, and people are still sick from that, because it's kind of a valley and it's a heavier chemical. So these things do have purpose, importance, and it's good to be aware of. And especially before you, again, go to help or clean something up, know what you're dealing with before you do that. All right, another quick video we're not going to go through. I feel like I covered it pretty well. So in these, these safety videos, we're actually, I'm just going to put this shameless plug in here. We're creating a new type of safety video called safety shorts, because these safety videos, I'm not going to lie, they're boring, even for me. And I'm kind of a, easily to entertain kind of person. They're terrible. I don't know why the 90s was just the decade of safety videos, but most of them were made in the 90s. They're just bad actors. They're not entertaining, and all you remember is that they were bad. You don't remember anything about the video or like information about it. You just remember they're bad. So anyway, I'm going to digress here, get back to the topic at hand. But yes, we're making some new videos. Keep your eyes posted for safety shorts. They'll be coming to a safety meeting near you soon. SDSs. So SDSs, safety data sheets. Again, the HAZCOM book's going to talk about it. The chemical inventory is typically going to be tied to it, and it's going to give you specific information about each chemical. It used to be known as the MSDS, but in 2014, when they made the switch to GHS, that changed. So now they're just SDSs. It's going to give you a lot of different information. 16 sections of information, and they're uniform. Before 2014, a chemical may have an SDS, and they may only have 5 of these sections, or 7, or 10, and they may be in different orders, right? So you have 2 very dangerous chemicals. On one, you look, section 4 is going to be firefighting. On the next one, it's going to be section 10 or 9. And so they uniformed it, and this is the order. I'm not going to read through it, but just know that there's 16 different sections. The reason I don't go through it, I'm going to be honest, you're not going to remember all 16 sections. I've been working with this stuff for decades. I still have to look it up. I promise you. If you need to find out which section is which, you can look that up in your HAZCOM manual. You can look it up on the OSHA quick card. You can look it up on the GHS website. Anywhere you want to look, but it is uniform. So section 4 is always first aid measure. So we'll just put that out there for you. All right, so training is the last portion which we are accomplishing today. This is an awareness training. What do I mean by awareness? It means that this is just a basic overview. I did not go through your company's HAZCOM manual today. That's something you can do, again, on your Saturday night. When you're looking through that, it's going to describe specific processes for dealing with chemicals. I'll be honest, some of these are off the shelf. They're not well vetted. They don't specifically deal with your company. Then update them. Talk to your supervisor, be like, hey, man, let's spend 20 minutes on Microsoft Word. Heck, let's do it on, Microsoft Paint. Let's update this manual and get it specific to our company. Make sure it works. Doesn't need to be complicated, but make sure it's customized to you. All right, again, painless. We're already through one topic. A few more to go here. We're going to keep it simple. So a couple concluding remarks about this. Hazardous chemicals can be at your work. Make sure you read the SDS to protect yourself. Make sure you're properly trained to work with chemicals, and never respond to an emergency if you're not trained. All right, so again, we're going to keep this kind of in a nice vein here. We're going to talk about a specific chemical and go through what that chemical training looks like and what's all involved with it. And that chemical is benzene. So benzene, you hear a lot about it. We know it's bad. No one likes it. It's, something, it's negative. But believe it or not, it hasn't always been seen that way. And we'll talk about that in a moment. Again, 5 objectives here, keeping it simple. We talk about how to protect yourself from benzene, the different exposure limits of benzene, what PPE you need, routes of exposure. Again, most common is inhalation, and understand how it can affect you in the physical sense. So it's a few basic things about it. It's a colorless liquid, but unlike H2S and some other chemicals, we consider that a sour smell. This is a sweet smell. So benzene has a nice sweet smelling odor. It's a common component in crude oil, and if we'll look at the chemical composition of it here in a minute and why it is so common. It's also in gasoline, natural gas, a lot of different products. It's also found in substances like volcanic emissions and cigarette smoke. It's in a lot of places, and I'll show you why here in a moment. So the chemical composition of benzene is C6H6. So typically another way that we refer to oil is hydrocarbon. And if you look at the chemical composition here, you have carbon and hydrogen. It is, in essence, a hydrocarbon, it's like legitimate, full-on, 100% hydrocarbon. So because of that reason, it loves to live in hydrocarbons, such as oil, gas, and then even all the way into benzene, diesel fuel, etc. It is a carcinogen, causes bone cancer, otherwise known as leukemia, and it can also cause bone abnormalities. And some of these can be passed down genetically. So that's pretty important to note. And as I mentioned, it hasn't always been known as a bad thing. In fact, they used to put it in aftershaves and lotions because it had this sweet natural smell, and it was cheap. It was a byproduct of oil. So they could use it as a filler and, put it all over your skin and smell good. I say that in the, 19th and 20th century, earlier in those times, but for whatever reason, this just came out recently. They use it actually in sunscreen, and I don't think they like injected benzene into the mix, but because of part of the process, and I don't know who's testing, banana boat at the end of the day, because obviously they allowed it for public use, but it's part of the process. It actually created benzene, and we've been putting that on our skin for a long time. So if you're a big sunscreen person, watch out. And there's also a big lawsuit, so maybe you can get it on that. But yeah, benzene's bad, and we've just been dousing ourselves in it for decades. So keep that in mind. It's also flammable. The thing about benzene's flammability is we're not dealing with benzene by itself, right? Benzene doesn't magically separate itself from the hydrocarbons that it's in, such as gas and oil. It's a part of it. But the unique thing about benzene is the lower explosive limit and the low upper explosive limit. Why is that important? Well, for example, natural gas, right? Your propane, ethane, pentane, actually pentane's excluded. They have a higher, not a very high, but typically a 4% mixture with air is the lower explosive limit, meaning you need 4% of an area of natural gas, propane, etc., to ignite. So if you only have 3%, you could light a match, nothing's going to happen. You don't have enough of it. The problem here is benzene. If it's in that mixture, if you have 1% benzene mixture in an area, you light a match, you will have an ignition. Same thing with pentane. It also has a very low, it's 1.4%. Again, late cool Saturday nights. That's why I know all this stuff. I don't have any notes in front of me even, so it's just, popping out of me. Again, lots of friends, like so many friends, I don't know what to do with them. Upper explosive limit is also low. Usually they go to about 14%, other than H2S, which you remember is 46%. So being that you have so many different competing flammable light ends or materials inside of natural gas and oil, it's kind of difficult to trust one UEL or LEL because they mix together. But it does have a lower explosive limit that can ignite at a lower concentration, and then obviously ignite the other chemicals that are in that material. So that's our concern. Exposure from the health side. So there's this flammability side on the health side. I'm not going to lie to you. It's bad. If we breathe it in, it goes into the central nervous system, and then that hydrocarbon, it eventually finds its way to our bones, and it weakens our bones, and it causes abnormalities, and again, cancer if it's there. Most commonly, it's breathed in. Some ways that we're going to know before we get the leukemia that benzene exposure is we've been affected by it, or just, and the problem is most chemicals have this: headaches, okay, nausea, all right, convulsions, loss of consciousness, cancer, etc. And I'm going to talk about this in our next topic, norm and TeNorm. But if you've had a cold for 6 months, you do not have a cold, okay, brother. You got something wrong with you. And I know plenty of oil field hands, right? They will avoid the doctor. And now we're all running for COVID tests for, I can cut my finger and make sure I don't have COVID. But realistically, like, benzene's around. It's a hydrocarbon. It is the hydrocarbon, C6H6. And exposure to it can cause problems. So if you find yourself sick for a long time, just because the COVID test says negative doesn't mean that you're perfectly fine. There could be something more serious. If you're a pumper, if you're a truck driver, if you're a flowback hand, even a workover rig guy, not as common, but you can be exposed to this, and over time it's going to cause some problems. All right, again, moving on, going to make this least painful as possible. Now, this picture, I have no idea who put this into my presentation. It was a long time ago, and I've thought about taking it out every year, but I'm about to every time, and I'm like, I can't. It's a great example of like just the worst possible. Like, no one's doing. Who drew this? No one's grabbing a benzene container up on a shelf with their mouth open, looking up. I mean, it's just not realistic. But anyway, don't do this. Just this photo, just don't do that. Anyway, our exposure limits, right? So number one, don't drink it. But the PEL is so low So over an 8-hour period, you should only be exposed to 1 part per million. I mean, this is literally, it's 1 drop in about 15 gallons. All right, so I want you to picture 3 5-gallon gas tanks on the ground, right, and take 1 drop and drop it in there. That's the equivalent. So it's super small amount that we can be exposed to in an 8-hour period. So over the course of an entire year, if you're to work around it every day, and I'm not even saying this is safe, this is just like the maximum, right, is 1 part per million. That's like 365 drops compared to, I don't know what, 15 times 365 is, probably like the 600-700 range, 700 gallons. It's an infinitesimal amount. So most tests I've taken in the field for benzene, they give you about, anywhere from 100 to 200 parts just right off the thief hatch. You just open that thief hatch, take a benzene test, you're going to get about 100 to 200. So just kind of keep that in mind. And there is some PPE, but it is there. Don't be breathing in the gas. H2S, we talk a lot about that, but benzene is way more common. It's just a little bit more of a slow grind for the pain that it's going to cause rather than instant, such as H2S. So you need to have a plan. What do we do to protect ourselves from benzene? What kind of protection methods do we have? Where do we stand when we open thief hatches? What kind of ventilation do we have? What PPE do we wear? All these things need to be a part of it, as well as training. All that needs to be a part of it. So we're going to talk about some controls here. Administrative controls, these are great. Engineering controls, again, are going to be dealing with pressure, making sure that vapors stay where they're supposed to, or they're routed to the flare, that the well is killed, we don't have gas just kind of floating everywhere. Those are our typical engineering controls. There's not really a typical chemical program to remove benzene from oil, so that's something to keep in mind. On the administrative side, we have these labels, so benzene. And again, you'll notice some similarities from the HAZCOM program. You got your pictograms there on the bottom right of the label on the right. And you'll see, it's a health hazard, it's flammable, and it's an irritant. So there are some things you're going to see and feel before you actually get really sick. So pay attention to your body, know what's going on. Also SDS, look up the SDS for benzene, what PPE to wear, and I'm going to cover that here in our next slide. So PPE, pretty straightforward. You can wear a half mask, right? So respiration or aspiration is one of our biggest concerns for benzene. So a half mask works, actually, up to a certain amount of ppm. So about 10 ppm, it's good. Up to 100 ppm if it's the right type of cartridge, but over 100 ppm, that's where you have to wear your full face piece. That's when we get in the IDLH atmosphere, a full face piece atmosphere providing respirators such as the ones on the top 2 photos. So keep that in mind. If you're getting tests of over 100, that's the OSHA recommended and NIOSH recommended PPE. So if it gets in your eyes, if you get it liquid, benzene will be one of the things that irritates you. Again, in crude oil or salt water, where it may be, there's other things that are going to bother your eyes too. So just understand that it's a 15 to 20 minute eye wash or on your skin process. So you want to have those around as well for that reason. All right, testing for benzene, a few different ways that we do it. There's the badges or charcoal tubes. Cartridge method. So we'll actually hook this up into a meter, pull a tube, it'll give us our benzene level, and we'll say, hey, this is what the benzene level is. Now a lot of times these have little hash marks on the side and it'll give you a ppm, or you'll have a digital reader connected to that charcoal tube that'll give you an actual ppm. So that's a cool tool. There's also something called a passive collection beaker or a SUMA canister, essentially a stainless steel thing. It looks like a little propane tank. You put it out in the field, open up the valve on it, and it just sucks in the atmosphere, just naturally, passively. And then you close it after a period of time, 15 minutes, 8 hours, 24 hours, send it into a lab. They release that gas and test that gas and then say, okay, this is a 24-hour period. How much benzene is a person exposed to? You can also use badges, as I mentioned there, which is a similar model. It's passive. It collects, the charcoal collects benzene over time. You put it in solution, test that solution, and say, hey, this is how many ppm of benzene someone's exposed to. So this is where it gets a little, I'm not a chemistry guy. I know enough about it to bore people at parties, but that's about it. So there's the NIOSH 1501 rule for this, for testing for benzene. Very complicated, but it is around, guys. It's there. There's nothing we can do about it. Be prepared. know your PPE is necessary. And if you're concerned, if you're constantly getting sick or sick for a long time, may not be H2S, may not be COVID, it may be benzene. So just putting that bug in your ear. All right, wrapping this one up. Again, I said I'm going to make this as painless as possible, and that is what I'm going to do. So make sure you're wearing your PPE and you have it available, because benzene can make you sick. It is in petroleum products. It's there. It's a hydrocarbon. Oil's a hydrocarbon. Gas is a hydrocarbon. It's just part of the game. And then make sure that you protect yourself if benzene is present. All right, our last topic of the day, NORM and TeNorm awareness. So if you know a little about NORM, that's great, because I'm going to go a little bit more in depth than most awareness level trainings go. If you don't know anything, that's great, because I'm going to give you a lot of information about what it is and how to protect yourself. So NORM is natural occurring radioactive material. It is natural. It's in the earth. You could even consider the sun providing some amount of NORM through radiation. So radiation is essentially, and we'll get into this a little bit later, it's when an atom is essentially unstable. And when it's unstable, it can change what it is to different things. And typically when atoms and cells are changing, that's bad for us. That's not what we want. So whenever we remove pipe or fluid from the ground that has radiation, we can be exposed to it. It can cause problems. So that's just natural, right? It's in the ground already. There's unstable atoms in the ground from thousands of years of being down there. It happens over time. TeNorm is when we enhance it technologically. So we do something to the earth or to the oil that we're working with, or to the sand, and we enhance it by pressurizing it, by pushing a lot of it in together, by doing something to it. We physically modify it. So this material is typical in a lot of disposals where we have oil and gas moving consistently and water moving consistently, different types of water moving. That's where we're typically going to find some TeNorm. So again, they're radioactive elements, and there's two different kinds, and we're going to get into that a little bit, but essentially it accumulates over time, and there are different people that are responsible to know about NORM and TeNorm and tell people that it's there, test for it, and then ultimately protect people from it. So that's our job as leaders in the industry to do. So, little history, and this is interesting. I once had a huge crush on this girl, and she was in a play, and I don't usually go to plays, but I made an exception, and lo and behold, this play is about safety. So, I was about as happy as a person could be going into this play about safety. And it was about this Chicago place called, I think it was called Radium Laboratories, and they made watches out of radium. So they actually took straight radium, the gals in this play, and this is actually historically accurate. It's true story. They would take little paintbrushes and paint the numbers and the watch faces on a watch back in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, and it would glow in the dark. Fantastic. Think of how cool this is, right? Like, you got a watch that without light, it just glows in the dark, right? From just this chemical you licked and put on there, because it bonded to saliva really well. So they'd dip it in the radium. They'd lick it first, dip it in the radium, and then put it onto the watch face. So these gals started getting real sick. Bone cancer, like stomach cancer, brain cancer. They're dropping like flies. Like, in a 10-year period, I think there was like 50 or 60 women working in this warehouse, and like 40 of them were done, either dead or out, or couldn't work anymore, couldn't walk up the stairs. It's terrible. Eventually brought a lawsuit against the company, who denied any wrongdoing, said, it's a fluke. We have all these women dying. No one else around them's dying, just the women. And their kids and families are getting sick too. Strange. But it has nothing to do with us. They proved the case. They won. Unfortunately, most of the women had died by the time they figured it out in about 1925. But that's where it started. So there's a play about this out there. It's called Radium Girls. Again, Saturday night, look that up. Anyway, that's where it started. That's the history of kind of how we found out that NORM and TeNorm radiation have these effects on us. So radium is the most common thing that we look for and test for. It is the most problematic for us as humans. So there are testing things that we can do out there, and is considered an ionizing radiation. Non-ionizing radiation is it's a radiation that does not have sufficient enough energy to really do any harm to us, because it doesn't dislodge orbital electrons. Now, Again, I'm not a chemist. It is not my world. Definitely not a radiological chemist, but basically you don't want things dislodged from you. So we'll just put it that way. So these dislodging electrons cause problems in our body because they dislodge things in our body and break our body down. And that's non-ionizing things like, microwaves, ultraviolet light, lasers, radio waves, infrared light, etc. Cell phone, waves, we don't know yet. Maybe they are. We're just kind of all guinea pigs on that. But ionizing radiation, we know it causes this problems. Alpha particles, beta particles, neutrons, gamma, and X-rays have these in them. And radium is obviously a physical material that has this, it's emitting these from it. So there's a background radiation. And I don't know why. When I first started in the oil field, my first job was actually dealing with radiation. That was my job. Like, here's a radioactive source, put it in this tool, send it down hole, it emits its radiation. That radiation bounces back at a certain point because when it hits water and soil, it reflects and returns, and then it gives us a map of the well. It's called logging. And in this training, this guy comes in, he clicks, turns on the TV, puts up his projector, whatever he was doing, starts clicking through, plays a video. And in this video, a guy takes one of these sources home for whatever reason. He put it in his pocket, thought it was a battery, I don't know. Takes it home, puts it in his shirt pocket. I'll never forget this. Gets home, wakes up in the middle of the night. It's like, man, baby, I'm sick. I don't feel good. My chest hurts. I take him to the doctor. The next scene is like blood and pus and just crazy stuff just shooting out of this guy's chest. And the doctor's worried, and the boss is there, and the wife's crying. It's a whole mess. Turns the lights back on, turns off the TV, and is like, guys, listen. These sources are no more dangerous than walking through a sunflower field. And I'm like, what? Why? How's this guy in the video dying, like that horrifically? And you're telling us it's this thing in safety trainings about radiation. People always talk about sunflower fields. And I don't know if sunflowers emit some amount of radiation. They probably do. But I don't know why they always use sunflower fields. So, that's probably my pet peeve is when they talk about it being a safe. And who's walking through sunflower fields? Like, is this your senior photo shoot? Like, who's doing that? Anyway, I digress again. I know I'm going off on a lot of tangents with this topic, but deserves some comic relief, So, yes, background radiation, there is some. Typically 30 rem per year, cosmic radiation at sea level. If you're higher up in the air is a little bit less dense, it's a little bit lighter, it's a little bit thinner, you're going to get a little bit more. So at about 10,000 feet, you're going to experience about 140 rem per year from cosmic radiation. Now, the average oil field worker, we're allowed, or oil field, people working around radiation, we're around to be around 5,000 rem per year, or MREM, not REM. REM, it's essentially a thousandth of that, so just keep that in mind. The M is 1,000, so anyway, it's significantly higher. It is definitely not the same as walking through a sunflower field, I'll tell you that. Here it is in the oil and gas industry. It's an oil, gas, and mixed production. It's there. So obviously in our region, a high crude oil region, we like the gas. They're using it to mine Bitcoin now. Crusoe is out there. I know Kraken's using them for one company. There's a few others. Pretty cool stuff. We don't have a lot of natural gas. It's not our main thing. In other areas, it is a higher gas production field. You can see that represented here. It's also where the norm is. So it can be in the gas, it can be in the oil, it can be mixed, and it's higher in southeast Texas, as you see there. A lot higher in Pennsylvania, Ohio, West Virginia, even over to Indiana and Illinois, Kentucky, Tennessee. Yeah, I know my states actually. I can actually draw. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I can draw the states mostly from memory. I know, again, lots of friends, just tons of them. All right, half-life. Half-life with radiation is essentially everything has a half-life, right? Like cells have a half-life. Radiation is how we determine the strength of an atom or a nucleus that is radioactive and how long it takes to break down. So we use that in half-life. I think, certain things, and again, we're talking about ain't the reason crude oil been down there for a long time, right? Long time. Some people would say 10,000 years, 100,000 years, millions, 6, who knows, a long time. And some of that stuff hasn't broken down all the way yet, and that is what we get up when we produce natural oil and gas. Again, it's unstable electrons. So a few different things. It's essentially it's a wave. That's important to know. Uranium is a type of ionizing radiation, and when it breaks down and it essentially tears atoms apart. So if you've seen anything about Fukushima, Hiroshima, different areas where it's either been a nuclear disaster or a nuclear weapon, the danger here is it like literally rips things apart, and that's bad for us. We don't want things to be dislodged, but we even have a natural amount of radioactive elements in our body. It's kind of a part of living. It's what breaks us down, or part of what breaks us down over time. It's just what it is. Most atoms, however, are stable, but the ones that are unstable, again, they can completely change elements. Uranium will turn to lead. Some people believe that sunlight through process radiation turns into hydrogen. Light completely changes from its original form. And then we also get things like gamma, alpha, and beta particles, or rays. They're kind of synonymous. So on the norm side, these just happen. They're part of, you pump out salt water, there's going to be some amount of norm. Usually it's negligible. It's not even going to show up on your meter, so we don't have to worry about it. But when we do things, we frack, right? We pressure. Sometimes we'll send radioactive material down into the earth. Then we're going to get back higher levels. And then even in smaller amounts, though, it comes through a production system. Over time, it's going to collect and accumulate in the pipe, and then you're going to get higher levels than is just natural in just a gallon of salt water or oil. And that's where we're going to see it in filters, in piping, in tanks, in treaters, disposals. That's where you're going to see this stuff. So ionizing, we have typically 4 or 3 different types of rays that we look at: alpha, beta, and gamma. Alpha can be stopped by a piece of paper, right? Beta can be stopped by aluminum, and then gamma can go through a lot of stuff, but it needs to penetrate a dense material, such as a human being or lead, to be stopped. And obviously, if we're the thing that's stopping it, that's bad, because then it's staying in us, and we don't want things dislodging our electrons inside of our body. So, there's different. This chart here, not really my bailiwick, goes very in depth into different types of amounts of radiation out there in the world, but note that a lot of them are in the ground, and then there are, inhalation. We do inhale them, or they're atmospheric. So we're going to go into testing and screening for TeNorm and norm. So there's a few different items that we use. Essentially, there's a survey method that we use. And, typically we use the Ludlam meter for this. Essentially tests for radiation and gives us readings. And there's different types of readings you can get, right? You can get REM readings, you can get gamma ray readings, you can get all kinds of different readings just depending on the type of instrument that you get. But essentially you use these, you'll test trucks, you'll test facility piping and equipment, you'll test filter socks, and determine the level of norm or TeNorm in them. Once you find that, there's a process. Like, okay, this we got to get cleaned out. We got to take it to the proper disposal. We have to, fence this area off and say, yes, this is a norm area, so that we're not just out there, smoking a cigarette, leaning on the pipe, hanging out, talking to Billy about the game. We want to be in a safe area, not in an area where our innards are being dislodged. Makes pretty much logical sense, I hope. So there is a more in-depth training. This is the awareness level, right? I'm giving you the very basics about norm and TeNorm. There's a 40-hour course for radiation safety office training, and a bunch of courses in intermediately between here and there. If you are working around norm, I'm hoping, and you know it, I'm hoping you've been through a little bit more of an in-depth class than that. But for the rest of us, it is here. It's at disposals. It's at production facilities. Anywhere where you have oil and natural gas moving through a production system, there's going to be some amount of norm. It's not a question of if, it's a question of how much. Just like benzene, just like H2S. It's going to be everywhere. So a lot of that's going to be training. Different, if you are in a company that works around norm or is in the process of dealing with norm, then you will have certain responsibilities as a worker, as a supervisor, or in a management position. So make sure you understand those responsibilities. The federal government takes them very seriously, as well as the Department of Environmental Quality. So keep that in mind. Here's an example of what norm can look like inside of a water pipe here. So this is a cold water system here, and you have radiation in there, and it can look like anything, just your regular scale. I mean, I live in Williston. I've got a water softener. If I don't use that, if water dries in a glass, it's like bright white. It's a little bit disconcerting. I'm not going to lie. I probably need to do a little bit better water processing. Wilson, if you're listening to this, I'm sure the city of Wilson's checking out my YouTube channel. But yeah, radium's out there. It exists. It hardens. It becomes a part of the system, and then that pipe obviously needs to be disposed of in a proper way. We don't want to just dump that in someone's backyard because it's going to be emitting it into the atmosphere. Here's an example of a pipe that has been overcome by a scale that is radioactive. And there's a couple of different ways. As I mentioned, you can use your Ludlow meter. You can, kind of wave it over the pipe and say, oh, we got so many rem that we found here. Or you can actually take a sample of the scale, send it into a lab, and they're going to give you exactly how much is in there. And depending on your level of work with radiation, that may be required. So where is it going to be found? Again, production water equipment, oil equipment, gas equipment, piping, pumps, filters, storage, holding tanks, treaters, tank bottoms, pumps, separators, pipings, wellheads. Anywhere where there's piping and equipment, you're going to find NORM potentially. Here's kind of a picture of where it can be found. Basically anywhere. In a gas plant, it can be in the stills. It can be in your low-cap buildings. It can be in a lot of different places. So protecting employees from NORM, again, cordoning off areas is important, letting people know where it is. And then there's, I mentioned not, being around the NORM area, hanging out, talking about the game. There's 3 ways to protect yourself. It's the good old TDS. And no, that is not STD. That's something you get if you're not up on Saturday night watching, safety videos. You're doing other stuff. No, I'm just kidding. TDS is time distance shielding. So, minimum amount of time as possible we want to spend around radiation. We want to increase our distance to the maximum amount possible, and we want to have as much shielding as we can as possible to protect ourselves. And this is something we also call the ALARA principle in NORM and TeNorm, which is low as reasonably possible, or allowable, achievable. Essentially, we want to prevent people from being exposed, but we do know that we have to work around radiation. I mean, it's naturally occurring, for goodness sake. Like, there's nothing you can do about it. You can't prevent it, but what can we do to keep that exposure to is the least possible amount? So, PPE is effective, but candidly, time, distance, and shielding are the best thing. When I worked for the wireline outfit, they didn't give me like a shield to walk around in, but they did give me this long stick with a threaded end, and you'd stick it into this thing that looked like, Back to the Future, like radioactive, canister. You stick it in there, you grab the source, you tighten that thread in, pick it up, stick it into the tool, unthread it, close the tool, put a screw in there, a set screw, and then send it down hole. So we were around radiation pretty close, and that was about a 1.5 foot long, tool there. So I'm not sure our distance was as great as we'd want it to be, but at least they didn't make it pick it up with our hands. So that was a small mercy there. But yes, time, distance, and shielding is the way that we protect ourselves from radiation. PPE, yes, you can wear gloves, full body boots, face shields, and respirators, but it's going right through all that stuff, unless it's all lead. Lead will hold it out, but I don't know a lot of guys working with lead suits on. That's not your typically daily attire, so that's a little bit of the problem. We kind of went through what the effect on cells and what the dose we're around, the dose rate, meaning how much at a time, the quality of the radiation, which we don't typically think about it in those terms, but higher quality radiation, higher quality problems. And then also the stage of development of that radioactive electron at the time that you're exposed to it. And that has a lot to do with how long it was underground and how far into its half-life is it, and a lot of things that we're not just going to know naturally. All right, so how do you know if you've been exposed to radiation? Again, from my story about the video, if your chest is concaving and blood and pus are spouting out, you probably were exposed to a lot. Less than that, just like benzene and all this other stuff, COVID included, you're going to start feeling sick. You're going to have a headache. You're going to feel nauseous. You're going to have a nosebleed or a nose running. You're not going to be able to sleep. So again, if you've had a cold for 6 months, get checked out. And there's a variety of things that you might need to get checked out for. And that's why it's important to have a plan and for your company to be testing for radiation. So some different shielding examples out there. Essentially, our typical amount, again, is about 5,000 for the whole body, 15,000 for the eye, 50,000 for shallow at the skin level, or 50 rem or 50,000 rem, MREM. Minors 0.5 or 500, and a pregnant worker's 0.5 or 500, which is essentially what we know that we're just exposed to, right? Because everyone's exposed to about 100 per year on average. But yeah, 5,000 is, or 5 rem is about what the maximum we can be exposed to over the course of a year. Now, again, the way we know that, just like the benzene, are little badges. So you wear the badge, charcoal or other medium. It's just exposed to the air, and it's going to collect any radiation that's it's exposed to. You send it into a lab. They dissolve the medium. They test it for how much radium or other types of rays are in there, and then they give you a readout. So when I worked for the wireline company, they'd send us those. They'd send us a report and say, hey, this is how much radiation you were exposed to. Good luck. Hope you've got a good insurance plan. And yeah, I'll be honest with you. Like when I worked there, I had a lot of like tremors. You typically get, you typically get if you don't eat enough potassium. So I definitely started to notice some effects. So labeling for this is also important, as we went through with the GHS and HAZCOM. It needs to say caution or danger, natural occurring radioactive materials, little radioactive symbol, etc., to let us know, hey, this is a dangerous thing. So obviously, again, we don't want pipe in backyards. Any fluids that have NORM, that truck needs to be labeled, and we want to make sure it gets to a proper disposal site. If you're working around radiation, you want to frisk in and frisk out, which basically means like leave your NORM stuff at the NORM site. Do not take it home with you. So unlike decon, which we do in certain cases, we just leave it. We ain't trying to clean it. Ain't going to work. You just leave it where you're at. Transportation, there is a license for transportation of NORM. You have to do that the appropriate way. And there's a bunch of rules and regulations for it. You have to, pay the fee and follow procedure, etc. We're not just, willy-nilly just moving NORM and TeNorm around. There's a process for it. Kind of wrapping up here, disposal. Again, to dispose of NORM, you have to have a license. There's protocol to follow. The workers that work at those disposals have to be trained and have to kind of know how to test and what the samples mean and how to protect themselves, how to make sure it goes down correctly. We're not just dumping it into the lake. Those are all requisites for handling NORM and TeNorm. So that's all we got. As always, or about every third training here, I like to put this out there. We are, Basin Safety. We are a training firm, and we like to, give back a little bit. You have to sit through. You have to hear my voice, my terrible stories, my worst jokes. So we want to give you a rifle. So the way we do that is you can go to Google or Facebook, LinkedIn, Glassdoor, Yelp if you want to, and you put in, basically find us, Basin Safety Consulting. In training, find us, put a little blurb in there, tell us you liked us, tell us you hated us. Don't tell us you hated us because it'll hurt our feelings, but no, tell the world what you think about the training, and then we put all of those names into a hat for a rifle at the end of the year, or a shotgun, and then also we're giving away some black gold clothing. So look forward to seeing your review. Hope you have a great day and be safe out there.